Hello and welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. Today is Friday, August 2nd. I'm Kirsten Korosek, and joining me today is senior TC reporter on the transportation desk, Rebecca Balon, and later a TC OG, Devin Coldaway, will be joining us to talk about AI and friends. You might have realized that I did not say Marianne's name. Marianne is unfortunately out sick today, but she will be back, so stay tuned for that. Rebecca, thanks for taking the time to join today. I know you've been super busy with a few scoops. What was your latest?
I believe this morning I came out with Rad Power Bikes, and they have gone through another round of layoffs, which is sad to see, but not ultimately surprising if we look at other big deal VC-backed e-bike companies like VanMoof, which went through bankruptcy last year and is now kind of having a resurgence. But yeah, that's what I worked on today. And by the way, if I sound any different, I'm in the New York office today. It's a bit cavernous and also quite cold. The air conditioning is on full blast. So
it's supposed to make you more productive. But yeah, I guess the point here is the e-bike business is hard.
So hard.
We do have some good news, though, to talk about on the show. Before we get to the show rundown, though, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Pods, Spotify, whatever your preferred pod streamer is. We do appreciate it. Now, on the show today, we have a few deals, including a seed raise over at FranShares, Canva's latest acquisition, and an eye-popping new fund over at growth equity investor Kennet of London. Then we're going to move on to dig a little bit deeper into two topics, starting with Alex Cook joining the list of VCs leaving their firms, and then wrapping up with our good friend and TC editor Devin Coldaway, who will join to talk about AI friends and deep fake foes. So I think I'm going to kick off the conversation. Let's talk about fractional investing. So specifically, there's a Chicago-based startup called FranShares. The TLDR is this: FranShares lets people invest in franchises for as little as $500. The idea appears to have attracted some investor interest. The company recently raised about $4.2 million in seed funding, led by Chicago Ventures, and with participation from the Pitch Fund and Litquidity, like LIT Ventures. So just an explanation, I think we all probably know what franchises are, but what many might not know is that there's pretty steep barrier of entry. So a franchisor owns and licenses a franchise business model. So think McDonald's or Great Clips or Jersey Mike's Subs. And that franchisee will pay for that license. And it can cost millions of dollars. I mean, even the lower end ones are like $100,000. So not everyone has $1 million to invest and create these franchises. So FranShares is kind of pitching sort of a win-win twofold situation here. The operators can access investment and fund expansion without going and getting a bank loan, while these fractional investors get a piece of the business without having to deal with the headaches and expenses of running a franchise. So it's really interesting to me. And what was maybe not surprising, and so Rebecca, I want to get your take on this, is that a large number of its 43,000 or so investors are Gen Z or millennials. So since you are Equity Pod's millennial voice today, would you ever invest in this?
When I first heard about it, I was like, this sounds like a recipe for disaster. But then I looked into it and I think possibly, maybe, I think that, millennials and Gen Z today are looking for new ways to invest, and it's kind of like a mutual fund for a franchise, right? Like people are looking for ways to get into the investment game, and we don't have heaps of money, but we all want passive income, right? And it reminds me of people that I know who, like friends of mine who've gone in on a house, right? For example, because it's really difficult to afford buying a house these days. So there's like 3 or 4 friends who will buy a house, buy a piece of land, and use that as like an investment property. So yeah, I think this kind of opens up the doors for a lot of things. When you said that it costs up to $1 million or over $1 million for, a franchise license, I thought, oh, what about city medallions for taxi drivers in New York City, right? Or like the people who have hot dog carts on the street. Like those are actually expensive licenses to hold. And I can imagine a world in the future in which retail investors are able to get in on these different types of schemes.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying I actually find this compelling. But how does Franshares even make money?
Yeah. So basically what Franshares says is that they make money by charging the franchisees and the franchisors, so both parties, through a monthly subscription fee for investor relations management. And it's not clear what that subscription fee is, but that's sort of that constant stream of revenue. To me, the question is, what is the return on investment for the franchisee? I mean, what does $500 get you? And that's not totally clear. And how is that all managed, right? In terms of risk and rewards.
Yeah. Well, speaking of risk, like what are the risks to the investor? How are they protected?
Yeah. So Franshares says it wants to make sure people are protected. Of course, they're going to say that. So they require the franchisor to disclose financials, executive backgrounds, even litigation, and are regulated by the FTC. The startups' offerings are also subject to SEC regulations. So this is within a regulatory framework that should theoretically protect those investors. So I do want to say before we move on, I had to share the future vision of the founder and CEO in this interview in Marianne's story, actually, on Franshares, is that he sees a world in which someone is standing in line at like a Jimmy John's, and on their way out, they can see a QR code, scan it, and go and invest in that expansion. So kind of an interesting concept. We'll see how that evolves.
I don't know how I feel about the QR code.
Got to get the QR code in there. But this next deal, actually, I think is one I'm really interested in. And I know, Rebecca, you're going to take the lead on this one. It falls squarely in the a buzzy category. Of course, that means it is somehow related to generative AI. So, Rebecca, looks like Canva is making some acquisitions regarding generative AI. What's up?
Yeah, so they acquired Leonardo AI. It's another boost to their generative AI efforts. Generally, they are really, really going after Gen AI. And so Leonardo is a company that offers collaboration tools and like a private cloud for models, including video generators. They also give access to APIs that let their customers build their own tech infrastructure on top of Leonardo's platform. So this startup actually came about in 2022, so they're very young. The focus originally was on video game asset creation. I believe that they use Stable Diffusion for what they do. The terms of the deal weren't disclosed, but Canva's co-founder and chief product officer said that it's a mix of cash and stock. We do know that Leonardo raised like almost 40 million in capital.
So you would hope that there was some sort of nice exit. But I'm curious, because we've seen a number of these acquisitions. Is this more of an acqui-hire situation? Is this really just a talent poaching play that's happening where Canva's looking for more AI talent?
Well, arguably, you can say that all acqui-hires are kind of just about the talent, right? Like rather than the tech. I mean, that said, Canva will keep Leonardo as its own company. It will be running its own business still. So I think that, maybe that's a potential for another revenue stream. I don't know exactly how the deal is set up. But yeah, I think all of Leonardo's 120 employees will be joining Canva, including the executive team. They're both Australian companies, by the way. So they're both based in New South Wales, maybe both based in Sydney.
You actually have some expertise. You lived in Australia for a time and you spent a little bit of time with the folks at Canva. So just to back up a little bit, what is your impression of the company? And, it's a little bit of a, speculative question here, but do you foresee them making even more acquisitions? Have they ever given you hints as to what kind of buying power they have and the level of interest in growing through acquisitions?
They kind of keep that stuff close to the chest, but they have made a lot of acquisitions over the years. Like I think 8 in total per Crunchbase data, if I have that correct. And they've made a lot of acquisitions recently. So earlier this year, Canva acquired Affinity, which is a vector graphics software company. 2022, they acquired Flourish, which I love. This is a company that does data visualizations for the coding inept. The year before that was Kaleido, which is a visual AI platform for image and video generation. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? Canva is all about democratizing access to graphic design. And with the advent of generative AI, it's a match made in heaven. And, when I was in Australia last year, I interviewed one of Canva's founders, and they talked to me a lot about how they are going all in on AI. There's all these crazy new offerings. They're all called like magic offerings. So it's like Magic Switch, Magic Expand, Magic Write, right? They're all cool. I will say that it feels overwhelming. Have you been on Canva lately? You're just like, I just want to make a little something. And you're like, oh my God, the options, the things.
Well, the message, I guess, to Canva is slow down on all the options. And we'll see how many of these new options that come out of the result of this acquisition with Leonardo. And if there are going to be any more acquisitions this year from the company, I know I'll be watching for that. The last deal that I want to talk about is from our folks over the pond, our UK team, and it involves Kennet of London, a 25-year-old growth equity investor. They raised about 266 million euros or 287 million in US dollars for its next fund. And I should note that this is its largest fund to date. Reporter and editor Mike Butcher, actually even in the headline, shows that this gives some proof that there are, in fact, growth funds in Europe. So go figure on that. The continent is sort of routinely castigated by the tech industry observers for having too few growth capital. And compared to the US, that's absolutely true. But in this case, here we have largest fund, and they're already deploying funds into some B2B SaaS companies across Europe.
Who is Kennet? Like, how do they fit into the broader ecosystem?
Sure. So aside from being a couple decades and a half old now, they basically exclusively back established B2B SaaS startups that are founder owned and either highly capital efficient or fully bootstrapped. If that sounds like a very niche and narrow realm, it is, but it shows a disciplined investing approach for sure, meant to give really good returns. So this means that they're really looking for companies that are in the growth stage and that are built without external capital. So a good example of this would be the conference networking app Grip, which raised about $13 million in 2021, and Kennet led that round.
Okay, so bootstrapping equals more capital efficiency. So it's probably a safer bet for them to invest in.
Yeah, exactly. I do think it's interesting that they go after these bootstrapped companies. And the person I want to talk to over at Kennet is who is finding these companies and what sort of barrier entry. Because like I mentioned earlier, it does seem like a very narrow group, particularly they're also just focusing on one industry. Although I will say B2B SaaS is sort of like never ending, it seems like there's a never ending stream of these companies. But finding ones that are bootstrapped and don't have external funding does seem difficult. So it'll be really interesting to see what this growth fund does with this huge amount of money. So we'll be tracking that. All right. After the break, we are going to talk about two things. Alex Cook joining a list of VCs leaving their firms. And as I mentioned earlier, Devin Coldaway joining us to talk about AI and friends. So you might have seen this story shared quite a bit around the VC circles as Tiger Global partner Alex Cook is planning to leave the firm after nearly 7 years. This is a person who oversaw some of its largest fintech investments and India deals. So on that face, that's big news in the VC community. Apparently, it was really surprising to a lot of the founders because a lot of them said that he was incredibly involved. They're not saying where he's going. But there's two pieces to this news story. It also follows what is clearly a trend that's been going on for a bit of this musical chairs, if you will, of VCs. Typically speaking, VCs hang around to see the return on their investments, which oftentimes is about a decade. So you don't see a lot of movement. We're seeing a ton of movement here.
I have noticed that, and I'm wondering: are VCs leaving to start their own thing? Are they going into different funds, or is it too soon to tell what the trend is here?
Well, it seems like it's a mix. For instance, earlier this year, Marianne, she reported back in March, I should say, that Miles Grimshaw announced he was rejoining Thrive Capital after working as a general partner at Benchmark for the last 3 years. So that's an instance of moving firms. But not too long ago, I did an interview with the folks over at Renegade Partners. And one of the trends we talked about is this shift away from mega funds and then people leaving those mega funds and starting their own funds. And granted, it was an anecdote that was given to me was that they receive calls like every week from people who are in their circle who are interested in making that move. So I do think it's a bit of a mixed bag, but it is interesting to me that VCs seem to be shopping around different firms when historically it was like you stayed there once you planted your feet there.
Yeah, that is interesting. And we don't know, I guess, where Alex Cook is going because, well, this was an exclusive, right? So this is a scoop from us. So I don't think that he's actually fully admitted it. I'm looking at his LinkedIn right now and it still says partner at Tiger Global. I'm not super familiar with him. Do you know what he tended to focus on in India?
I don't have like a long list of everything that he's done, but he did anchor a lot of the fintech deals. So this includes TradingView, TrueLayer, Selfbook, Faz, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Refine. And the median size of his deals were about $35 million with the median valuation north of $250 million. That's according to PitchBook.
Yeah, I wonder what that feels like. I mean, as you say, a lot of VCs stay in it for a while. I wonder what it feels like as a founder. If, it's very relational industry, right? You have this relationship with a VC, and then if they suddenly kind of go poof, what does that do to that founder relationship?
Well, it's not just the relationship, but sometimes, especially if it's a lead investor, they might have a board seat. So how do you protect that and continue that relationship even if you've left? Now, oftentimes, at least at the C-level VCs I know who have left firms, if they were the lead investor, they continue the relationship, they keep their board seat, and that relationship continues. But Alex Cook was a deal maker, so that's a lot to handle. It'll be curious to see what happens to all of those investments and founders that were under his name. Well, enough about turnovers. I'm actually really excited for this next segment, and not because we're going to be talking about AI friends. No, it's because we have a real live human friend and TC editor Devin Coldaway joining us. Welcome, Devin.
Hey there.
Hey. So AI assistants seem to be this hot summer trend. It's the top 40 hit, I guess. We've seen a bunch of new releases from OpenAI and friends. So what is going on here? Explain it for us.
People are lonely. That's all there is to it. And they want a computer to be their friend. Honestly, I really don't know. It's frankly kind of a weird thing that has always existed that I've never really understood. But genuinely, people want the computer to be their friend. And that has been a thing for many, many, many years. There's always been some form of companionship that people want. They want to say hi. They want Alexa to say hi to them in the morning. They want to, anthropomorphize their computers or their laptops or their, mobiles or whatever. And this is just sort of the latest example of that. One of the things that AI chatbots like, ChatGPT are actually really good at is seeming human. They have very natural conversational interactions with people. And that's something that a lot of people actually lack in their day-to-day life. So I'm actually not surprised to see this use case kind of spin out and become its own thing. There are some weird issues with it. Like, I don't think that anybody should have to resort to an AI friend instead of like a regular friend, but people want to.
I agree with you, but like sometimes you got to deal with what is, right? And sometimes what is true and what it should be are two different things. Mm-hmm. And what should be true is that we all have, human safety nets and people that we can rely on. But the fact is that a lot of people don't have that. And I think AI assistants and AI friends, they definitely appear to be getting a lot of press lately. But I'm sure you remember this. Do you remember that company Replica from years ago? It was like a chat bot that like brought back someone's deceased friend. And a lot of people have used that. I've heard a lot of stories of people using that for companionship as well. So it does seem quite natural. I mean, we make companions with animals. Why not AI?
Well, robot animals.
Yeah.
At least recently, some of the news is also sort of a hardware play, which I wanted your opinion on. So Friend has this $99 necklace that uses AI to combat loneliness. So are we seeing it not just on your computer, but now in these like other devices that we carry with us, like the pin or the necklace or I don't know, the bracelet?
Well, I think people are exploring this because it makes sense to have a form factor that isn't a laptop or a mobile phone, because those are things you don't think of those as friends. And if something is on that, you think of it as an app. But if you have a little gadget and the only thing that gadget ever does is talk with you, then you think of it as, it's like you said with an Aibo, like a robot dog. That it only ever just acts like a dog. It's not an app. That's why people like it. It's a robot dog. And if this is a little robot friend that you can talk to whenever you want, and it doesn't judge you, it doesn't, do anything, it doesn't say anything weird, and you can chat about anything, it could be helpful to a lot of people.
But does it talk back to you? I thought it's something you talk to. It just eats up your words, and then does it engage with you at all?
No, it's supposed to engage with you. You don't just, I mean, you could
Okay.
just talk to like anything. You just talk to, my coffee. I could just talk to my coffee, and I probably do in the morning, but it doesn't talk back. And these AI assistants do. And that's kind of the idea. It's supposed to respond to what you do, and it will speak or it will send you a message, and you'll probably have different modalities. But I should say, there's no indication that these hardware devices actually even exist in real life. That we've seen a demo video, and we've seen like a concept, the open source one that came before. And we had the pendant, or the little pin, the Humane pin, which all of these, like the Humane pin launched and fell wildly short of, everybody's expectations, which were frankly pretty low already. And the rabbit, like that's another thing that everybody's like, so what's it for still? And so now with these pins or these little necklaces or pendants or whatever you want to call them, I don't know that they actually really exist, and probably not in the way that they're being shown in the concept videos. Like these are they feel more like design projects by like, an art school student that is demonstrating what could be, and not an actual product. Like you think for $99, you're going to get a thing that really works. I mean, you can't even get like I don't know what you can get for $99 these days, but it's not a fully functioning AI companion. Like,
Gallon of milk.
yeah, I know, gallon of milk, maybe. Yeah, maybe like a quart of milk these days.
Depends on where you live. Well, okay. So first of all, you probably already gave a bunch of startup founders a new idea for a demo, which is a coffee mug that talks to you. So thanks for that. Can't wait for that pitch
Great.
that comes later. But it does remind me a little bit about the sort of hype cycle that I witnessed with autonomous vehicles, which was companies looking to raise money. They were just doing demos. And then in reality, the business model was like a little bit of a kick in the pants, right? It was like, oh, it turns out this is a lot harder. So are you seeing that sort of just across the board right now with these AI assistants? Or are there a few that are really already standing out? I think of OpenAI. I mean, they just rolled out this advanced voice mode that's hyper realistic audio responses. Like, are we looking at a sort of a tiered system where there's a bunch of startups just giving demos and unrealistic expectations, and then a few popping up to the top? Or is everyone in this general hype scene and no one's really actually giving us something?
Well, we'll see, because I do lean on the side of the hype thing, because OpenAI and the ChatGPT, the hyper-realistic voice situation, like, they did this whole demo, which was really not a real demo. None of, like, a lot of those capabilities are not present in the product. It was very scripted. All this stuff about, it's reading the emotion and stuff like that. It's like, well, like maybe that's in there, maybe not. Like, how effective is it really? We're never going to find out, because they're releasing this very, very, very alpha thing to a small amount of people, and it has fewer features than they said it would. But still, they are putting out something. And OpenAI generally, they wait until they have a good product before they release it.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of the companies, correct me if I'm wrong, Devin, but a lot of the companies that are coming out and they're using ChatGPT, or they're using OpenAI's models or other companies' models to produce their own products, that will just make it more of a seamless transition. Like it's less, I don't know, assistant washing, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, no, absolutely. OpenAI wants to be the default for all AI related services. And they want to make it so that if you already use the ChatGPT API or whatever, you can just say, oh, and I'll pay an extra 20 cents per API call, and I get access to the voice API, and I can, return as many as 50 words in my response in a hyper realistic voice. Like, they just want you to be able to flick a switch and pay them a little more money, and you get whatever service you want. And that may be visual, it may be generative, video, all this kind of stuff. They want you to be all just in their system, so that you don't say, oh, what's the best option out there? No, you think, I'm already in the system.
So, like, speaking of companies that use ChatGPT, you edited my story last night that went out this morning about Heo, and they do also an AI chatbot assistant friend thing, but for kids, which is kind of weird and creepy, but I've used it. And it does have a really good back and forth and story generation and image generation. They don't just use ChatGPT. They use like 11 Labs and Stable Diffusion, I believe, just, to kind of bring this whole experience together. But yeah, it's certainly becoming quite a thing for all ages.
No, I mean, I'm glad you said Hio, because in my mind, I was saying, hey, the whole time.
I was too. Yeah, I know. They told me it was Hio.
Well, Hio, it is a little weird with like the kid thing, but then I think like, look, if the kids are already like, they're on their iPad or whatever, then they go and it's like, do I want them playing Roblox or do I want them having an AI to do some kind of storybook thing that also teaches them a little bit about, I don't know, medieval France or something like that? I would go with the interactive AI tutor over Roblox every day.
Interesting. Well, I guess this is like the Teddy Ruxpin of the Gen Z era, right? Like,
wow, that's like, how many generations ago did we just date ourselves?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Sorry, I'm here with my cane over here. You do bring up something though, which is particularly with the kids stuff, but it doesn't really matter on the age group, which is as this technology progresses and you have this interaction, what can you do about deepfakes specifically or hallucinations that give incorrect information to potentially a really vulnerable group of people, kids specifically, but really any of us?
It's a very serious question with no real answer. And every company, including Hio and stuff, they say, hey, we're taking this seriously. We have all these safeguards, but it's not clear what the safeguards are exactly and how they work. There's very few effective benchmarks on these things to say like, oh, well, this reduced, hallucinations by 90% or whatever. And there's a lot of research on this area because it's basically the Achilles heel of the entire transformer LLM architecture is that hallucinations can't be eliminated. It's everything it does is a hallucination. You just have good hallucinations and bad hallucinations, essentially. Like every good answer is also a hallucination, technically, but it's hallucinating the correct thing. So it's very, very, very hard to tell systematically if there's a bad hallucination happening.
Do you think that companies should have a responsibility to maybe, I'm thinking specifically about how Meta's AI, was it Meta's AI that said that the Trump assassination attempt didn't actually happen? And they blamed it on hallucination. So do you think that companies should be held accountable or should be more responsible when we're talking about things that are really sensitive and knowing that they haven't solved this hallucination issue yet?
I personally do. The question of how to hold them responsible is the open one, and how they can, like, for instance, with the Trump assassination hallucination, in order to prevent that from happening, they need to set up a rule for like to tell their chatbot, hey, don't talk about political stuff like the Trump assassination attempt, like Biden's age, like about Kamala Harris's prosecution record or something like that. And they have to make a list of these things. And then the AI would actually have to explicitly, like when I ask it a question as a user, then it has to go and do a big like comparison of my question to all these like blacklisted questions and answer itself essentially, was this question about one of these topics? And it actually adds a tremendous amount of overhead and computation time and all this other stuff. It's very expensive. It doesn't scale because it's like the moderation problem all over again. So, I wish that they would take responsibility, but I don't think they can. And I think they know that. So they're just kind of, apologize and move on kind of thing. They're like, oh, well, AI.
Ask for forgiveness later.
Yeah.
On the sort of digital replica deep fake side of things, I mean, there has been a little bit of guidance. I should mention the U.S. Copyright Office did release this report responding to this proliferation of videos and images, but I'm not so sure that it goes far enough or will hold companies truly accountable, because for every good company out there, there's potentially a bad actor that is just going to take advantage of the technology that's available, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, and there's going to be a lot of discussion on this. Like there was a bill put out just yesterday that's been kicking around. The Copyright Office suggested some stuff. The FCC is putting out some stuff. Everybody's weighing in on it, but it's extremely complicated. It's like we're going to have a discussion about this for years, the way that we've talked about like Section 230. So they're going to ask for a safe harbor clause in whatever, law comes out. And that means that basically it's going to continue happening just with this sort of like fig leaf of liability on it.
You've talked about this a little bit, like before. I think a few months ago, you wrote about how voice cloning political figures is still easy as pie. And I think that certain companies, correct me if I'm wrong, certain companies that you had listed in the article actually were taking steps to ensure that certain political figures weren't being targeted. It doesn't seem like that's completely difficult to do during peak election season, for example.
Yeah. And I talked with Maddie, the founder and CEO of Levin Labs, about this exact thing. And he was like, look, it's not easy, but it is not, impossible. And we just can't do it for 5,000 figures. We got to do it on the order of 100 or 200. And we can, make it so you can't have a fake Biden, you can't have a fake Rishi Sunak or whatever. There's stuff like that. So you gotta stick to the sort of A-listers at first, at least.
All right. Well, on that note, we're way over time. I blame Devin.
Well, you did ask me.
True. And I hope that you come back very soon, but we will have to leave it there. And Devin, where can people find you?
I don't think you can, actually.
I just wanted to ask.
Oh, I think your fake X account is still up, by the way.
I can't believe that.
I can't get them to take it down.
I started a whole Twitter just so that I could report that stupid fake me or fake me number 5. So please go report the fake Devin Coldaway if you don't mind. The real Devin Coldaway looks fake, but is not.
True. And Rebecca, where can listeners find you?
I am also on X. That's actually me at Rebecca Balan, and also trying to be on Threads at Rebecca Balan _right. That's not easy. Can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah. And I am Havesies on all social media networks and periodically look into it at Kirsten Korosek. Thanks so much for listening to another episode, and we'll be back next week.
Equity is produced by Teresa Loconsolo with editing by Kel. Bryce Durbin is our illustrator, and we'd like to give a big thanks to our audience development team and Henry Pickavett, who manages TechCrunch audio products. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.